Global Pavilion, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30 in Berlin.
Yeah, hello, welcome from my side. My name is Holger Lösch, I'm the Deputy Director General of BDI, the Federation of German Industries. Welcome to our side event. So we want to talk about something which had a breakthrough last year in Baku. I think a lot of you were in Baku last year. There were like 10 years of negotiations about Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, a very important part of the Paris Agreement, and it could be a good and important tool to support climate protection in developing countries, especially in times of scarce public money. It could also be a chance for European or German industries to find partners for technologies and markets for technologies in these countries. It could also be a chance for European industries suffering from an ongoing, not existing level playing field in terms of climate ambition to soften those impacts for competitiveness. So Germany has adopted the Article 6 very heavily in the coalition treaty of the new government. The EU Commission recently decided on her 2040 target, and Article 6, the use of Article 6 certificates is a major part of this decision. So there's a lot of dynamic going on, but of course, as always with certificates and Article 6, there are a lot of old and new questions. Questions of trust, of credibility, question of integration in compliance markets like the European ETS, and of course, how can governments and companies make it work? This is something that we would like to discuss today with a really good group of seasoned experts for the issue from several regions. I will introduce them in a short while because we will start with a keynote by a truly expert person, and it's Stephan Hoch. He's a partner of Perspective Climate Group, a think tank and a consulting company, and he's one of the top experts on this issue. He has done numerous research and consulting projects on it, and he will give us a good impression, a good impulse, so we can discuss afterwards. Stephan, floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me to give this address at this important event. And I also want to thank the German government for hosting this very nice pavilion here at COP30 where we can all meet today. I was told I could show a few nice pictures, so what I will try to do is not to go through the technical details of some of those slides and figures, but to tell you the story of where we stand now with global carbon markets and where we want them to get to in order to help deliver more mitigation ambition, but at the same time also the rollout of technologies and business opportunities. So the global carbon market is not anymore simply the EU buys all the credits from all over the world that came from the CDM. That's what we knew a long time ago, but it has been much more fragmented. We have a number of compliance markets. We didn't have one in the EU for a very long time, and neither in Germany, of course. But we have an increasing number of carbon pricing systems throughout the world, including by some of the so-called developing countries like South Korea, but also increasingly China. There's a large number of demand sources that are increasingly now also being integrated with NDCs. Then, of course, we also have the voluntary carbon markets, where companies have net zero targets, etc., etc. The very recent EU decisions to change the strategy and re-enter international carbon markets, I think, can only be seen as a game changer in this space. And as you said in your initial remarks, the international rulebook has been very recently agreed, only at the last COP after more than a decade of negotiations. But this is now what we have to provide the regulatory framework for the global carbon markets for decades to come. So what is Article 6? For some of you, this is now very basic, but because it is still a new phase of the global carbon market with significantly strengthened governance improvements, I would like to just very briefly walk you through some of the basics quickly. The key elements of Article 6 are 6.2, which provides an accounting and reporting framework for how governments and other entities trade carbon credits, for how to account for that in their NDCs, maybe also in schemes like the International Aviation System, or still also for private compliance purposes. Rather limited international oversight, but we also have in Article 6.4 an instrument, a multilaterally governed crediting mechanism that can be compared with the CDM, but again with significantly strengthened regulatory improvements. Common principles are environmental integrity, etc. Now this slide, again, I will not try to walk you through the details, but maybe some of you may also be interested to go back to this and take a look. It basically shows, like, if we start from the top, any carbon credit generated in any sector, whether it's forestry or industry or mobility, in different kind of crediting mechanisms, like the one under the Paris Agreement, maybe a bilateral mechanism like the Japanese joint crediting mechanism, or the voluntary ones like the gold standard, they will all be subject to an evaluation by the host country to either provide authorization or not. And this determines how these credits can be used. That is a crucial step. And you can see it here. No, you don't see it. This is the essential step for a carbon credit to become an ITMO. The authorization of the host country to say, yes, we will provide this accounting adjustment in our own target achievement, and that is why another country will be able to do so. Then we have various use cases. Again, I will not go through the details, but I want to visualize a little bit how these flows are. Now it becomes a little bit technical, but basically this is one snapshot of one important transition from the old to the new system. The transition from the old CDM to the new Paris Agreement mechanism, where we had a huge pipeline of more than 10,000 activities generating billions of credits. And what to do with those? There were a lot of legitimate criticisms, some of which have been addressed, some not. And now what you see on the right hand of this table is the number of eligible activities that come from the old mechanism per host country. So you can see China and India being still dominant, but having also an interesting overall geographical balance, including African least developed countries, but also major BRICS countries like our host Brazil. Now, all of these numbers here in the table are just for reference, but what we can basically see, we have 90 projects that are now already registered under the new mechanism. We don't have any new projects yet because those depend on the methodologies that we need, and the first one of these only became available last month when the supervisory body for this Paris Agreement mechanism has approved the first methodology that meets all the new requirements under the 6.4 mechanism, and that is for the waste sector. And now, step by step, we expect those methodologies to come in and then also allow new project development, as well as also adjusting all the documentation requirements in the existing projects to meet the new standards from next year on. So between 2021 and 2025, the old methodologies could largely be used, but from next year on, any such projects, whether it's an old one or a new one, they have to use the new methodologies. But even if the old methodologies have been used, there has been ongoing work to address some of these criticisms. And just to give you one example, in the clean cooking sector, a sector that has been much discussed rightly, for overcrediting, although I think most people would agree it's a very, very important sector in many countries. And also the International Energy Agency has very recently put out a report that we need to really scale up the investments in clean cooking, because it is an existential development need also for many, many people, hundreds of millions of people throughout the world. So basically what has happened is that the baseline has been cut by 2/3, which means that even if we have existing projects, they will only be allowed to issue a fraction of the carbon credits based on the old methodologies. So we can see significant improvements, even if the activity pipeline has been old. But you can see from some of the numbers, we still have 2,000 activities there that are now waiting host country approvals. And now the interesting bit is that countries have only 6 weeks left to either provide this approval or not. And I can see Fenella rolling her eyes, which I'm sure has to do with her experiences that I share in working with host countries on navigating all of these new requirements under the Paris Agreement. So it will be really interesting to look at this again in 6 weeks and see how countries have decided and what will become available for the market. But what the Climate Secretariat has said in a very, very well hidden some form of capacity building material is that they think, based on their experience now with issuance, performance, and also host country political signals, that this pipeline of the existing projects will likely generate around 400 million credits from the period between 2020-21, meaning the Paris Agreement implementation period, and 2025. So that's a relatively significant volumes that will more or less instantly become available once all of these regulatory steps have been taken under the new mechanism. That's why I've called the slide CDM transition as a fast start for the BMUKN, because despite my own fascination with the topic, few people seem to pay attention to it, but I do think there will be a significant supply becoming available that meets all the new requirements of the Paris Agreement, to be clear. This slide is frankly slightly outdated, but it also visualizes nicely how many projects by sector have already expressed to the UN interest in using the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism for new projects. So we have a couple of hundred expressions of interest, basically, to say yes, by the private sector, by project developers, to say yes, we want to use this mechanism once it becomes available, once the methodologies are there. So far, as I said, we haven't seen any new projects, but as methodologies are becoming increasingly available now on a rolling basis, I would also expect a rapid build-up of that portfolio. Two very quick examples of what we have not seen in the CDM, of new decarbonisation technologies that we hope to see being incentivized under the new era of carbon markets, that are currently considered as high-cost mitigation options, where we only have more or less early-stage R&D, pilot projects, maybe primarily focusing also on installations in Europe, for instance, but where we hope that carbon markets will become an incentive mechanism that can also accelerate the deployment of these new technologies in the global south. So what you see here is basically the example of fertilizer production with a green ammonia, so a specific type of green hydrogen, which is much discussed as a key enabler of decarbonization. And we can see that there are these new technologies that can help also developing countries to use green hydrogen or this derivative green ammonia domestically, not just for import to Europe or other advanced industrialized countries, but also in their own countries to help fertilizer production, to boost security and all of these things in a climate-friendly way. We are currently working on the methodology for the 6.4 mechanism for this, and I think it's one of the best examples of what we want to see in the future. Secondly, cement. One of the major sources of industrial emissions throughout the world, where there hasn't been, frankly, that much project development at scale on a technology basis. But we do see a lot of really interesting concepts to not only produce carbon-neutral cement, but even to bind biogenic carbon dioxide in a liquefied form in cement that can actually lead to this sector becoming also a source of negative emissions. Something that, again, is at a very early stage of technology development, but we hope this can be accelerated with the carbon market and also, of course, with complementary incentives And that is, I think, where there will be business opportunities also for the German and European industry, not only in advanced markets, but also throughout the global south. At least that's what we hope. One thing that is really important before I conclude, we have seen a huge volatility of carbon prices. So what you see here is basically what my colleague Axel calls the roller coaster of international carbon markets. And the curve basically shows an approximation of the price curve of international carbon credits. And you see various boom and bust periods. To some extent, this gold rush associated with the EU saying, no, we're not accepting international carbon credits anymore. And there was a huge rush into that pipeline, a huge price spike, and then, of course, a bust when that didn't become available anymore. And since then, you can see that in various forth and backs, it has been slowly crawling back to more interesting levels. And of course, now the really interesting question is what will happen now in reaction to new demand signals that are emerging, not only from the EU, but also from the EU and other buyers. So I want to leave you with some key messages before we enter the discussion here. It's really clear that Article 6 provides now a stable framework for decades to come. We are not reopening all of these negotiations, even though incremental technical decisions will continue to evolve and need to evolve. But the overall framework is in place. Secondly, and as you saw that clearly on the last slide, the integrity of this market is an absolutely essential foundation for its functioning. It's not a nice to have. It's not an environmentalist agenda. It's a crucial precondition for restoring the trust in these markets as a precondition also for compliance signals that we begin to see again. And we are in a really delicate phase right now where we are moving towards implementation. But it's a fragile environment, and I would encourage everyone to be really mindful of that and work towards high ambition carbon markets. Article 6.4 will emerge as the quality benchmark for that, but we are hoping that Article 6.2, anything under 6.2, voluntary market, bilateral mechanism and all that will align with these benchmarks. As I've said before, I think sovereign compliance to market will be the key driver of this. Voluntary carbon market is important, but we've seen historically that sovereign demand is absolutely crucial to get to scale. And I think the EU will emerge as the key player in this debate, but it will depend on innovative partnerships, not only between governments, but also with the private sector, with the host countries, to think about how can we have a less volatile and more stable, more predictable carbon market system that will reliably provide a demand signal and a price signal so that we don't only see low-cost technologies harnessed by the carbon market, but also those more costly future technologies that we want to see. And that, by the way, will also create the jobs of tomorrow, including in Europe and Germany. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephan. This was really impressive. I would like now to ask my other panel participants on the stage, and I would like to start with Fenella Aouane. She's the head of carbon finance of the Global Green Growth Institute. Fenella. Next is David Radermacher. He's the Vice President Sustainability of e.on, one of the largest, or is it the largest, German utility. Hello, David. Next in line is Erdem Aksakal. He's the Global Director, Purpose and Sustainability Marketing of SAP, another understandably German company. And we have to excuse Martin Hessian, the chair of the Article 6.4 Supervisory Body. How could it be different? He's in negotiations and he's stuck there. So we have asked Thomas Ford. He's working in our Federal Ministry for Environment, Climate and Nuclear to join us. Hello, Thomas. Oh, den soll ich nehmen. Entschuldigung. Okay, so let's kick it off. I would like to ask a first question to you, Fenella. So you are, of course, dealing with these issues for a long time. So if I see what Stephan just showed us, how important it can be or it should be, which role it could be, First of all, why did it take so long? And why was it, especially now when we're looking at the European debate, which we followed very closely, why is it still so, well, heavily disputed?
Hi. Working? See. German Pavilion. Everything works. It's great. Thank you. And thank you to the German government and thank you to the Institute and the group for welcoming me to join the panel. Yeah, you just showed that roller coaster slide, Axel's roller coaster. Yeah, I was just thinking, is that just my career? Yeah, it's kind of, been in this since 1997. So we were worried in the CDM days about things going too slowly. Methodologies took ages to get approved. Trades took so long to get registered. Everything was slow. And we said, we're not going to do anything. And the other major problem, which created the huge change in 2012, was that we weren't actually, or there's a debate as to how many emissions we were actually reducing globally. So they fixed that with Paris, and now we have the nationally determined contributions and different goals for different countries, but everyone has a goal. Now the integrity part became a problem in the interim years because you had no one that had to buy after 2012 for many of these CDM projects or voluntary projects. No one had to buy, so there was no kind of rules or standards or someone testing, have you really bought the number of credits that you said you were going to buy? And that's now coming back with Paris starting and Article 6 agreed. And I think that integrity issue will pass. We will work out how to do high integrity. Not everybody will like it because there will be things like the Cookstove's FNRB recalculation that is giving less credits for cookstove projects in some countries. But I always argue that if you had 100 credits and you were struggling to even get $10 for them in the voluntary market, okay, now you've only got 3 credits, but you're getting 3 times the price and you've got buyers all over the show. So surely that's a win. So high integrity pays. Now what are we going to do and how are we going to make it happen quickly? Okay, we're in a slow bit again. And the slow bit, if I just sort of talk to Stephan's slide a little bit around all these projects that are saying, yes, I want to continue into the next phase. In order for, we call a host country as a seller country. So this could be Kenya, India, although India could be a buyer in the future, but if we say it could be Kenya, Bangladesh, Nepal, other countries, they have to give an authorization, but they also have an NDC. So their biggest challenge is not only learning all the myriad of rules, but also understanding, okay, I'm told I must keep the easy stuff to do myself and to meet my NDC, and the more difficult stuff, the higher hanging fruit, as we often call it, to sell internationally. Okay, what's my higher hanging fruit? And that's actually a really difficult question for many countries. Do you calculate it just on a MAC curve? Do you do it according to national planning? And that's what's taking a long time for countries to do carefully because they have communities, they have developers in their own countries, so they have to show a very transparent process to them as well as the international community, which then becomes sometimes political as well, in order to have a robust system. So I think that's where the slow bit happens, but that's our role as an intergovernmental organisation to support countries to get ready to trade. Thanks.
Thank you, Fenella. Thomas Ford, I would like to address you now. I mean, the German government and European Commission have long been on all the COPs I can remember when it was discussed. They were more on the cautious side, to put it mildly. So now we had the decision in Baku, we have all of the rule work, the myriad rules, which could be a question, how will investors react to a myriad rules to invest somewhere? Could be a question. But do you see it now that after these decisions have been taken and we have the new government in Germany, we have the decision on the EU 2040 target, do you see that this is now enough for integrity? And what do you see as important next steps to make this really work in the sense it's meant to be, creating more climate protection globally?
Thank you so much, Holger, for this question. Indeed, you put your finger in the change of our government. And indeed, we have waited for so long for an opportunity to come on the market as a compliance buyer, because this means that we have to decide about the criteria for buying from high integrity markets. And this is not done. We have seen a great decision in the recent weeks that we are going now up probably for 5% direct use of Article 6. And we have a second 5% optional, I would say aspirational, for the LULUCF sector. So that means Europe is back on the market and have in the next months to create the catalogue of criteria. We have seen in June, I think, a list of criteria, very abstract. You cannot work with them. They have to be operationalized. And we have to discuss whether these rules are rules for companies or it is for a central buying system. And I think this constellation would like the Commission push forward for a central buying system, having the control and having no market mechanism. Maybe this is one scenario. The other is we get back on the national level, can incentivize companies to come in. This depends on the EU side in the EU. That's not that easy that we would say, okay, we have companies, they use it, but for which purpose? What we have decided in the EU is that we are not going for the ETS directly. Maybe there is a chance that we go for the market stability reserve. In this case, companies could use their own activities, bring it in. This has to be discussed, one option. The other option is for the LULUCF sector, what we are doing there. I would say we have a big problem with our EU compliance system with nature-based solutions. We learn more and more that this is challenging for the EU. We need international cooperation. That's more and more clear. Therefore, we have this aspirational target, right? And the other thing is we have not learned it fully. To have the CRCF as a buying tool for the ETS, okay, we will discuss it, we will be criticized because the level of integrity will be not the same with the Article 6. Maybe this is not necessary, but then you need some additional ruling in the EU. What is the content of this? It is worthwhile to be one-to-one to an allowance or not. This has the EU also a little bit to decide. So many questions are open, and I think there is a big elephant in the room. We speak about 2040, and we say we could account or buy in 2036, and this is very late. There is no market signal in it. So, but the EU has maybe understood this already. We have a pilot phase starting in 2031. So let's say we are preparing now and having a chance to test in these years. But pilot can mean that we use these certificates. This is to be discussed. I think we have challenges there. And what we need also, we need partners. And I know maybe this is something you are asking later. I stop here. When questions are coming to the practical implementation, I'm ready to speculate, but I will say something is cautious.
Yeah, so having quite some experience with EU making international rules their own. So in all experience, I would say it would take another 10 years to have a solution in the EU. I would ask Stephan, I mean, first of all, how fast do potential users of the system have to have clarity what's going on? And the second thing, I mean, the elephant in the room is of course, can it be included in the ETS, in the compliance markets, which is now in the European decision, it's not part of the ETS. So perhaps these two questions before we get to the real doing in the private sector.
Yeah, it's difficult, right? I mean, there will be a lot of discussion. I think you said in the next few months. It would be great if we could resolve it in the next few months. But I'm hopeful that maybe it can be done within the next year. Or maybe, let's say, within the next 1 to 2 years. Having clarity in that space, I think it would be probably sufficient. But of course, also, we shouldn't just discuss within the EU in that time. I think we should start now to start building the partnerships, both with the host countries, but as I said, also with the private sector, to see how can certain businesses help bring their technologies to the global south immediately. As I said, there's a variety of markets. It's not just the EU. There is also the demand from COSEA. There is also the demand from other voluntary targets, or maybe also from other jurisdictions. So even if the EU starts buying relatively late, there are already some demand signals. But the other thing I would like to point out that there is also a piloting phase that was part of the EU decision framework, which is completely undefined. So I think that gives a bit of space also for an earlier use of Article 6, in particular if we think about that we have a range for 2035. So maybe Article 6 can help get to the upper end of that range, or even beyond, because the step to 2040 is quite a steep one. Thank you.
So the ETS question?
Sorry, the ETS, yes. Well, it explicitly says it's not to be used in the ETS, but I would actually agree with you, Thomas, that everything I hear points to that most likely there will be a use of international credits to replenish the market stability reserve, because we clearly see from all the modeling that it's likely to be empty if we look into the later part of the 2030s. And that also really matches then the time frame for the compliance demand. So that's what I expect. I don't expect a turnaround, that it will be the same as before, that operators buy directly. It will be a central system, and the most likely option is the MSR. Thank you.
Okay, so that's interesting, because that was, of course, for us a great question, because we see 2039 end of any certificates for industry, which is clearly in the existing global environment a no-go. I think the EU Commission sees these as well, so there is need for solutions. It's something which industry is looking very carefully at. So I would like to switch to the private sector now, because in the end, private sector will have to play an important role. And I would like to ask David, do you, in your position, how much have you looked at the possibilities, the opportunities the Article 6 certificates can bring for your business model, which role you could play in there?
Yeah, thank you, Holger, for hosting us, and thanks for the question. I mean, what's important? What's important to note? Now, okay, third try. What's important to note is, and I would like to re-emphasize that point, the controversies in the voluntary carbon market have led to a lot of uncertainty. And there is no first mover advantage on the corporate side right now. Even the most ambitious and also the most involved companies in the voluntary carbon market have faced greenwashing allegations. There was like a general suspicion to corporates being active in the voluntary carbon market. Now, the intention of the Green Claims Directive at EU level was a good one from a consumer perspective. But of course, that led to that breakdown in the voluntary carbon market because there was nothing to earn for corporates anymore. Even though corporates were not accounting for or not using voluntary carbon credits to account for in their climate targets, there was a significant shitstorm on all corporates using carbon credits. And these controversies, of course, lead to this reluctance to now be a first mover. Now, if we talk about the EU aiming at 2036, as you said, this is, of course, not leading to restoring the trust in that market that we need right now. So we need this first mover from a jurisdictional side now to establish this trust for corporates to act. And I think also then, of course, ultimately it comes to the question of ETS and convergence of markets, whether we make this relevant or not.
I would switch to Erdem. Erdem, SAP. I mean, if SAP is hearing that anywhere on the globe there is a myriad rules on anything, I think you have a lot of ideas. So how is SAP looking at this system? Because from what we've seen now, what we've been talking through, I mean, it's a great opportunity. It can have great effects. It can solve a lot of problems. But to be honest, looking at the slides, it seems a little bit difficult in the first view. But how is SAP looking at this, and what could be a contribution to make this easier?
So thanks for the question. Before jumping into the SAP and technology conversation, I'm just trying to wrap up what I hear since the beginning of this COP compared to the previous COPs. We used to hear a lot negotiation, conversation, long-term, articles and policy in the previous COPs. But these COPs, I'm hearing more action, implementation, collaboration, data-driven, operation, and outcome, which is a perfect improvement for all the parties and all the contributors. So it is for sure the implementation COP. And also second one, I'm hearing with pleasure from all the panelists about trust, integrity. But we can contribute by utilizing technology from integrity to accuracy, from trust to transparency. Because data can help us to find out what are the next steps. From each industry, we have different, as you mentioned very well, we have different patterns and we have different best practices all over the world. I think it's the perfect time to create industry-wide collaboration, country-to-country collaboration, or even company-to-company collaboration to change best practices and to understand what the next steps by utilizing the data. I will be mentioning a bit from AI, but I don't know if you have a specific question for the AI in the upcoming ones. If not, maybe I can jump right now. So I listened to Stephan's keynote with pleasure, and again, I saw a lot of big numbers, impressive numbers there, in terms of numbers of projects, megatons or millions of dollars. But what we can do is we can bring all these mega ideas into the ground by utilizing best practices, by integrating AI. And to derive AI-led practices, we need the accurate data where it exists in all over the companies and industries systems. So what we need to do is we need to find the data, rely on the data, feed the AI systems with it, and then define the next steps altogether.
Thank you. Fenella, as you've been describing the roller coaster as part of your life, I think you are the perfect person to ask what should not be done this time? What could be the concept to make this work this time? Well, because obviously we've seen ups and downs, and we have seen tries and errors and so on. And now there was a 10-year debate, and we urgently need something to happen. So what, from your view, what should happen to make host countries and the contributors to work together and to make it happen?
Okay, so, hello? Sure. Okay, so first of all, I won't say my lesson learned is career choices. Let's leave that one. But Yeah, it's now. Let me think carefully about that one because it's a very big question to say very quickly. But I would say do, share, and learn from peers. So this idea of just, stop the talking and actually do something. We are in the implementation COP. We signed large term sheets yesterday for one of our funds, and we're seeing transactions happen. But we need to create the data in order to put it into the AI. Because I can tell you, anyone who starts using AI on carbon, really be careful. Because it really doesn't work until you've actually got that rules and history. So we need the data. We need to start doing a transaction, and it's the inclusion of the global south in the sense of they're generally the host countries who are selling. So what you need to do is do a trade and let them learn from each other. The less lecturing. That will make things happen quicker on the host country side. The buying side, there's still massive confusion for me about what do we do with private sector compared with government buyers. So we work with sovereign buyers. We're able, therefore, to slightly stick our head above the pulpit to try and say, okay, we'll go first. That will hopefully help share with private sector. I really want to ask a question about market stability curve, a reserve against price capping, but I'll leave that one.
Thomas, as we now have a model where obviously countries, governments have to deal with the private sector to make these contributions possible. And we just heard from you, of course, and I understand this. So when you did a mistake in the past, you don't want to repeat it. So how can you imagine a system where governments, the private sector could work together and still keep a market pace?
Oh, this is a very difficult question, and I tend
I know.
That's good, otherwise it was not worthwhile. No, Holger, the point is we have to learn that climate policy is economy policy international level. So we have the instruments in Germany since decades working well, and I know we have still to work on the amelioration of these instruments, but colleagues are in the foreign trade ready to do so, and now we have the reason to incentivize companies to go. I hope this could work together. The role of a government is to set the framework, and the framework means agreements, maybe treaties, maybe working groups with the host countries on the technology. What is useful on the strategy of the host country to become net zero, to achieve the NDCs? We have promoted the idea that it must have a political embedment of the activities we would like to promote. Now we are not there, but close by. We need to quantify the activities. We need to motivate the host governments to define the mitigation activities or the removal activities. And this means that they should be sure that they can give up the ITMOs, this famous thing. And this could be really discussed on the bilateral framework between governments. And of course, we are not working instead of the companies, and the companies should be in directly when we would like to identify the technologies which should be transferred. And this is really not done by governmental officials. What I've done and promoted was every time in close coordination with companies. We have not said, this is a good abstract technology. We want that you implement it elsewhere. So this is not the way forward. Now we have prepared for this cooperation, and now certain states in the European Union are able to do so. Germany certainly should be one of the best cases. We have the Netherlands, we have Denmark, which is hesitating. There is the other country, Sweden, which is going ahead. So we should mobilize the EU. with these national policies, can build a blueprint for the whole European Union. We have a few. We have done a lot of capacity building. We have looked for sectoral initiative on the investment side, on the N2O sector, on the SF6 phase out. There are many things we have in our mind, but everything was done with companies in Germany, not without them. That's important that we mobilize ourselves, and each one has to play the role.
Thank you. David, you have a good view not only on e.on but on general market activities and what other companies think. So how do you think the companies are going to take this up now? How would you, from an e.on perspective, now try to make this operational?
So there are already companies that anticipated the developments, of course, and there's certain development already in the market. So we had the LEAF Coalition already 3, 4, 5 years ago, initiated as a public-private partnership. And before I go into more detail, I liked your question better, actually, because what actually needs to happen now is we need to be a little less German on the questions that are ahead of us. So no over-engineering, but really making things happen. And we're good at thinking things through. But this time I think we really need to start making things happen and implement it. And then we already see, we had the announcement of our colleagues from Bayer, Deutsche Bank, and also Siemens on Article 6 credits. So that's important. We see these movements. Companies are willing to adopt if they have the stability, if they see this reflected also in standardized frameworks. We see it in the SBTi net zero standard. But so we need to have this, this kind of longer term thinking. You said it can be a framework for decades, and that stability is required for companies to invest now.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, of course, this would be great just to do, then look what doesn't work, change it. But this hasn't been the mindset in European politics for decades. So it's more of a risk averse and trying to not have any risk working. So this would probably be a much different mindset, which could be developed in discussions about this tool and other discussions. Erdem, so looking on the IT side, on the digital side, I mean, we see that digitalization, so I think we're all clear that AI is not going to solve any problem on the planet, to be used with a little bit of caution. But of course we see that if you have to make transactions, projects on this scale, on this complexity, on a global scale, you probably need a lot of digitalization. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So, what are your ideas of in SAP, and how do you see the other partners in the IT industry reacting to this?
I mean, we are helping all the countries around the world with many companies not to have high-level target, instead granular targets in the product level, in the transaction level, like the financial accounting. So this is the magic in the carbon accounting. We have been doing financial accounting altogether since for the last 50 years by utilizing IT systems. Now we have the magical power to apply it into the carbon accounting. We cannot reach out to the targets of the reduction of millions tons without dealing with grams or 0.0 grams. So we need to understand the product level, transaction level, and granular level of the carbon, and then we need to manage this by utilizing the IT. All the industries have different patterns: agriculture, logistics, mobility, manufacturing, and we need to understand and upload the data into the systems so that we can action. We are now relying a lot into the policy and the regulation, which is a great benchmark to start into the action. But the real action happens on the innovation level, and regulation doesn't foster the innovation. For innovation, you need to have it in your DNA, and to foster the innovation, you need to rely on your industry codes, company codes, data, and culture. When you embed this into your IT systems, and then whenever your target is whether to reduce emission or to share the responsibility with the partners, then you will have the next steps driven by the data. This is what we think.
I would have a question which I would like to ask Fenella and Stephan. So we, of course, as this panel is as it is, so we are talking a lot from the perspective of the buyers. We talked a little bit about the host countries, but from both of your experience and your contacts with potential host countries, so what do you think, how is the thinking there? How do they see this as a chance? I mean, we all know governments from other countries coming and say we will plant 5 trees, or people from companies, could you give us some money for that? So this is definitely not how it's meant. So, but give us a little bit of an insight how the mindset in the potential host countries is and what they really need to make this, a credible thing.
Okay, it's always going to be better described in a real case study of something we're currently working on. And I'm reflecting on how does this bring in private sector from Europe and how is there technology transfer? Okay, with my greatest thanks to Thomas and Marlin of BMUKN, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's it. So with the greatest thanks to the German government, we've been running a program called Spark for the last 3 years. We have been working in Zambia. The Zambian government has no power. The rain hasn't come, the hydro projects are not generating power. They are heavily indebted. What do? We explain Article 6 carbon markets to them. They don't sit there and say, oh, wow, it's a pot of gold. No, they go, oh my God, is that going to help us turn the lights back on? And is it going to help us do it in a green way? That's why the Zambian government wants to do it. Now we go in and we start identifying what is a project. And we go and we have found a project. It is a sugar mill, privately owned, that processes sugar. And there was a German consultant who said to them, you could actually use some of that waste sugarcane sitting around in the fields and generate electricity out of that. And then you consume less from the grid. And they said, well, we looked at that, but it was too expensive. So then we look at it and we say, okay, so here's your financial model. So you've got effectively a viability gap for funding. What if that could be filled by carbon? Okay, now we are progressing and we are going to help out the sugar plant to put in a biogas boiler. It would be great if there were technology providers that could help do that. So that's where I sit. I mean, I'm taking photos of the sides saying, great, cement, where am I going? Okay, but expensive at the moment. But green hydrogen, things like that. So that's what most host countries are looking at. If they're looking at a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, we're normally walking in straight away and saying, no, let's explain and break it down for you. Okay?
Okay, thanks. Stephan.
Yeah, to add to that, and maybe trying to go a bit more to a general level again. As you've said in your introductory remarks, the rules have been finalized last year. So what we see throughout the global south is that countries are now developing their national frameworks to translate these international rules into national law. That is an ongoing process. And the important message here is there will be a legal basis for that, not just in bilateral agreements, but in national law. That is a much more robust basis that we are anticipating. We don't have it yet, we don't have the supply, but once that is established, and I would say that will really increasingly build up next year, at the latest in 2 years. Almost every country is working on that. So we'll have a much stronger legal basis. You said very nicely, Fenella, countries don't know what is a high-hanging fruit, what does it look like, how does it relate to our NDC. So we also need to do a little bit more education, also dialogue, to develop a common understanding of what does that mean. But the final piece of this is then also, yes, Article 6 should mobilize the high-cost option, but that implies, and we don't talk about that enough, I think, somebody also needs to have the willingness to pay that higher price then, because of course it should be more efficient than here. That's why we import these credits in Europe. But at the same time, it will not be $5 or $10 anymore, I hope. It may be, 30, 40, 50, maybe even $300 per ton if it's a negative emissions technology project. If it's a green hydrogen project. That will be a small niche in the market. I'm not talking about one universal ITMO price. I'm talking about the different market segments that are necessary to mobilize really the high-hanging fruit. At this stage, of course, with the intention to make the cost curve come down, in the decades to come. Thank you.
So two people fetch their microphones, Fenella and David, and then I would go in a quick final round.
I would just say that Zambia's put their law in, and it's in now, and the carbon framework. So it is now enshrined in law, supported by the German government capacity building.
Yeah, and I would just like to emphasize what you said. We talked a lot about trust and expectations on the buyer side, but the expectations on the jurisdictional side, on the selling side, are just as high. We know from Uganda, they're not only putting this in law, but they're building bureaucratic processes to comply with the regulation. And that is important. If we now kind of play with this trust, I would say, we risk that next governments just discard that build-up processes, that bureaucratic processes, as a cost. So if the market doesn't really come to life, if we don't start to source credits from these countries, we lose this trust and don't fulfill those expectations.
So this was the perfect impulse for my final question. So if we come together here, not here, in some cooler place, hopefully. I like Brazil, I love Brazil, but this is really hot, and I just arrived this noon, so I have to accustom. But let's say we meet in 5 years from now, maybe in Norway, which is a bit cooler, and we sit together on this panel again in this group. So could we just not talk and have a movie for an hour with all the projects which have been realized then? Or would we sit here and discuss an hour who is responsible for all of this not having worked? Stephan.
Sorry, responsible for? The last bit.
For failure.
For failure. Sorry, I'm not sure I understood the question properly. I'm really sorry.
My question is, could we sit together and just look at a movie with all of the projects which have been realized and it's working, or would we sit here and lament who is responsible that it hasn't worked until then?
I think it's the uncertainty. There has been a lack of clarity on the political decisions on what is needed, but we have that now. So in order to make that movie a little bit longer, in order to extend it, I hope we'll see a lot of public investments that will exactly give the private sector that confidence that you rightly describe that we currently don't have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas.
Yeah, I think I would like to take it from two angles. The short one, we have so many hurdles here in BEDAM to come through. We need the methodologies. We need simple money for the work of the SPM. And we have this bullshit, let me say this, CDM trust fund discussion. And we learn that in the worst case, we get $3 million for the Article 6.4. These are the hurdles for the next time, because the SPM has done in the recent 12 months super good work, and now we need the methodologies. And then the companies can use it. then there's a reliability, then there are the discussions with the host country, how to share the benefits, then we can move on. The second thing, you are right, that it's more critical. Do we set the frameworks from the buyer side correctly? I think we have to go further for the host countries with the capacity building, that they are prepared, and we need the mobilization of the companies. When we have now in the targets 230 million ITMOs mid of next decade, it's nice. But what we have also to learn, additional point for a later discussion of the BDI, we have to spend money for the NCQGs, for the 1.3 trillion in the year 2035. And this is about the investments in the third world, in the developing countries, and European companies could be part of it. And it's not transferring money for nothing, it is business investment, and it must be good for both sides. I think this comes later, then the political pressure comes on us again, and then we see, okay, we must do more together with the companies.
Thank you. Erdem?
I'm quite optimistic as we are together here for the action, and we have the industry practices exchanged, we have the international practices exchanged, we have the data platforms transparent and intercorrelated with each other. I think there is no reason for not learning from each other. There are best practices, it's just a matter of actionizing it. We all together stepped into a digitized world. Now we are going to step a decarbonized world altogether.
Thank you. David?
So if you ask for my wish, it's actually that we in 5 years sit together and show projects where actually European technology and know-how is used to drive change, drive the energy transition in the global south. And there's a consensus amongst both corporates but also policymakers that we have found a framework that allows us to efficiently find the cheapest form of reducing emissions because a ton of CO2 is a ton of CO2. And that's on the wish side. Realistically, I think we'll get a lot further than we think today. We will overcome that skepticism, but still there will be questions unsolved.
Fenella?
2031. Well, Thomas will be phoning in from the beach, and I think there's going to be. Where will we be? Okay. So there's an English phrase, if you say it's all going to be failure, a turkey doesn't vote for Christmas. So, we sit here, we're in an industry, it's going to be pretty much our jobs to be somewhat positive, but I am anyway. I think we'll have trades, I think we'll have a beautiful video. I think we'll all be moaning, because that's what we always do. We'll be moaning about the next problem, and the next problem is one that we haven't learned how to solve, which is that unfortunately, if you're going to get things agreed by consensus of 195 countries under the COP, it's going to take a long time to get quite a few methodologies approved under PACM. And that's why I think it is important to make sure that we're looking at 6.2 as well as 6.4. But I do think the private sector, because it's 2031, will be very focused on the piloting started, this isn't working, that isn't working, where is it happening? And that's what we'll be lamenting, but we'll definitely be progressing.
Okay, as a lobbyist, we need to lament. I mean, that's part of our job. But on the other hand, first of all, I want to thank you. I learned a lot, and that's the best if you moderate a panel and you learn a lot. And thanks for that. And I would say I'm optimistic because we don't have another chance. We need to use this chance, and I think there has been a lot of work done by a lot of people here on the panel, and therefore I'm optimistic, and and then I would even sit at 35 degrees again if we would have some good results. Thank you, and wish you a wonderful COP, and thanks to the audience for attending us. Bye.
Global Muchidão, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30 in Billy.